This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the new Lewitt Ray microphone with Aura, Auto Gain, and EQ mode through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre, mixed through Isotope, Voice Enhancement Assistant, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
I think one of the best pieces of advice for anybody who's trying to be creative, whether it's songwriting or cartooning or writing, and it's so hard for all of us now to do this, is to actually be in the moment. Let your senses interact with what's happening instead of immediately reaching for your phone and letting your phone document what's happening. Our senses are way more interesting and powerful than what's on an iPhone.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. In 2024, Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin, unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V series, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White series and get the Adam Audio A4V and A7V with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a repeat guest, Bill DeMain, a successful author, songwriter, journalist, tour guide, and musical historian who's been on the podcast previously for episode RSR456. So please check that one out if you'd like to hear his backstory. And we talked a lot about songwriting and stuff like that. As one half of the pop duo Swan Dive, Bill has released 10 acclaimed albums with his singing partner, Molly Felder, enjoying several top 5 singles and tours of Japan, Thailand, and Korea. He's also written songs for and with many other artists, including Curtis Stigers, Marshall, Crenshaw, Teddy Thompson and Kelly Jones, David Mead, Bleu, Kim Richey, Jill Sobule and Boo Hewerdine. His songs have appeared on TV shows like Sons of Anarchy, Private Practice, Felicity and the L Word, and in commercials for Laneige Cosmetics. I think maybe I pronounced that right.
You got it. Yeah.
All right, good. Unicef and Sky Mobile. Bill's also a much publicized music journalist who's written for Mojo, Uncut, Entertainment Weekly, and Classic Rock. He's written 5 books, amazing, including 2017's Amazon bestseller Sgt. Pepper's at 50, and 2 of collections of interviews with noted songwriters such as David Bowie, Stevie Nicks, Ray Charles, Dolly Parton, Barry Gibb, Kate Bush, and Smokey Robinson. In addition, he is the owner of the music history walking tour, Walk in Nashville, a radio correspondent for BBC Glasgow and a cartoonist whose work has been published by Reader's Digest and Funny Times. Psyched to have Bill back on the podcast with us. Please welcome back Bill DeMain to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bill, my friend, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock. Thank you for having me back.
Dude, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for joining us on the show. It's fun to read your bio, man. You've done so many cool things. I mean, Sterling Huck didn't even get a specific mention in the bio, but we did talk about that last time. Tell us what's new with you, man. What's the latest?
Well, it's been a really busy year for me as a journalist. I've been working especially for Mojo this year. They've been, it kind of comes and goes. Like any sort of freelance work. Sometimes it's super busy, and then other times there's just a drought. But this year, thankfully, there has been a lot of interesting work. I did a feature on all of the surviving Stax songwriters.
Oh, wow.
I did a tribute to Burt Bacharach after he passed. I went down to Memphis and talked to Jody Stevens for a Big Star feature. Lots of really interesting, varied stuff.
Jody's been on the podcast too, so you guys are both now podcast mates.
Oh, I love Jody.
As well. He's great. He told some funny stories. I think one of the questions I asked him about was how he got the sound of his cool kick drum on the recordings. I mean, pretty nerdy question to ask.
Yeah.
And he said he has an old pillow from a couch that's been in his kick drum since like 1970 something. It's never even
I love
removed.
It. Yeah.
Just fall into pieces in there. I was like, all right. Well, cool. So let's see. You've also been doing some great cartoon work too. I mean, there's your Instagram, which we'll include a link to in the show notes, Rockstars, along with Bill's discography, so you can go listen to the records that he's done. But you really tapped into an amazing thing with the Oddbirds brand and or I don't know if brand's the right word, but theme and the cartoons that you've been publishing. Tell us a little bit about that.
If there was one good thing for me that came out of the pandemic, it was that, because I had so much time on my hands and I wasn't getting a lot of work. So I had to figure out some way to stay creatively engaged so I wouldn't lose my mind. So I started making bird art. And it was all around. I had written all of these poems called Oddbirds for kids. And I was always thinking, I got to find somebody to illustrate these. And finally, I just thought, well, I can do it. I'll just learn how to do it. So I started doing a lot of collage work, and I did that obsessively all through the pandemic. I mean, it's kind of all I did. My house was just full of like clipped construction paper and glue and scissors. And that led to a line of greeting cards, which I now have in the Frist Art Museum gift shop, which is really nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then the Oddbirds kind of segued into cartooning, because I've always loved cartoons, but I never took art classes. I never really thought of myself as somebody who could draw. But I think that momentum of Oddbirds over the course of a year gave me the confidence to just say, I'm going to start drawing cartoons. So I started about a year and a half ago, and I'm still really obsessive about it. I draw cartoons all the time. And so, it's a weird thing to be doing in a way, because there's not much outlet for cartoons these days. And if this was the 1950s or 60s, every other magazine would buy and publish cartoons. It was a viable way to make a living in a way. These days you have the New Yorker, which is the Grail, and then Reader's Digest, Funny Times, Weekly Humorist, a couple of small things. So I'm drawing all these cartoons and trying not to think too much about it. Like, is this a logical thing to be doing for me at my age? But I really enjoy it. So I'm trying not to look beyond that.
Well, it almost takes me back to grade school. It's like, we start out drawing cartoons and doodling and in class and on our notebooks and stuff. And that's one of the things that's always been cool about what you do is you not been afraid to pay homage to a time, and a style. I guess not everything's necessarily the 50s, but you definitely seem to have an appreciation for that, mid-century, whether it's musical or, the collage stuff or cartooning. Do you feel like that is that has shown up in your writing as well? And do you think that My Comet is even a fair description?
I think it is. I mean, especially in Swan Dive, there was always a retro element, and I never thought of it as something that I was doing consciously, to try to be hip or something. It's just kind of all the music and art that I grew up on and still find really resonant tends to be stuff from the 50s through the 70s, and not to say, I mean, I love a lot of contemporary music and art, but yeah, I find there's so much wonderful stuff in the past that I still haven't even discovered. So that seems new to me too, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, the sort of mambo samba kind of influenced stuff too, I think, right? Or there's just like, I guess is, I don't know the right words to use. What do you feel like are some of the musical styles that, influenced your writing, as far as if you were to attribute them to anything specific?
I think certainly Tin Pan Alley and the Brill Building, which is a kind of New York-based songwriting scene where there were songwriters writing for artists. And in a way, a lot of them sort of came out of a tradition of 32 bar form. And then by the time the Brill Building was in motion in the late 50s, early 60s, you started to hear influences of musical theater, influences of what they called the Bayan beat, which was borrowed from bossa nova.
Right.
So I think, honestly, I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and I went by the Brill Building, where all the songwriters like Bacharach and David and Carole King and Jerry Goffin used to work. And if I have one ongoing fantasy in my life, it would be that I would be a songwriter at the Brill Building in 1961. I think I would have fit in so well. I just think that, aside from 1961 had its own attendant problems historically, I think I would have been really happy there as a songwriter.
What? Tell us more about the Brill Building. So I don't know much about it, really.
So the Brill Building is at 51st and Broadway. It's in Midtown. It's a beautiful old deco building in New York City. And from the 1940s through the 60s, it was the home of most of the music publishers in New York City. And by the late 50s, early 60s, it became the hub of a whole generation of songwriters who came to kind of define American pop music for a couple of years. Like I said, Bacharach and David, Goffin and King, Mann and Weil, Neil Sedaka. It was a really rich time in American music, and it just all seemed to be concentrated in that building.
Yeah, 1961 Music Row in one building.
Exactly.
New York style.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
Very cool. So, what about stuff that's going on for you now musically? I mean, we talked last time about writing for Swan Dive. Have you guys had any recent, or like, as far as, I don't know whether you're often writing with Molly now still as Swan Dive, or whether you're sort of doing your own writing, or it's just a little bit of all of the above, but talk to us a little bit about what's going on with you and your music stuff.
So this year, I've been writing with three songwriters, all who are artists and all who are pretty active in making records. One is Mary Bragg. Another is this guy named David Meir. He's Swedish. And then another guy named Joe DeLillo from Chicago. And I've been co-writing with them either in person or via Zoom. And I like co-writing with all of them, not only because they're good and they're talented and they're nice folks, because they're all making records. So that's appealing to me, to be working with somebody where the songs might actually get recorded and get put out and sung. At the same time, Molly lives in Whidbey Island, Washington. So that's 2,000 miles from here. So I don't see her.
I'd forgotten that she moved.
Yeah,
moved
I don't
away.
see her that often. But she came back to Nashville to visit in April of this year. And while she was here, we did a live stream. And it sounded great, and I'm always reminded, even if we don't sing together for a year, it's like, oh yeah, we have this thing that's we can just pick it up wherever we left off. So I think we both felt really excited and the response was good. So starting in the summertime, we started swapping files of new songs and some songs that had been sort of put aside over the years. Like, why didn't we cut that song? Maybe it just didn't fit on a record. So we're having fun doing that. We've got about 8 or 9 songs in motion right now. But honestly, after making 10 records, all of them for labels, which kind of helped us pay for them and put them out.
Yeah.
Now that we don't have that structure behind us, and we're not touring, there's a little less motivation for us to finish things. So I think eventually we will, but we both have our lives and our work, and but it sure is nice to be making music with her. Whether or not it's going to come out as a Swan Dive album, I don't know. It could just be a song or two, that gets put on streaming services.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair question, because I think that probably applies for a lot of us. This thing that can happen when you, in your younger days, you connect with bandmates, songwriters, whatever, and you do your thing and you develop like this, connection and language that makes it easy to make music together. And then it's also a typical story that we might all go off in different directions and pursue careers and do other things or families. But there's there might always be a draw to want to keep making music together and doing stuff. And I'm guessing that you've also seen that happen with other artists since you've been paying attention to a lot of other music makers. What are some thoughts that you have on that topic of holding on to those original creators in our lives so that we find ways to keep making music together and keep pushing through when there's not the obvious momentum that there used to be?
I think part of it, and I can really only speak for me. I mean, even though I do have a lot of artist friends of a similar age, and I've watched them go through different periods in their career where they're more active, more creative, and then less active, less creative. But for me, I think part of it is adjusting your expectations. I feel like being in the pop music game is kind of a young person's pursuit because you have more energy and maybe less disillusion and more freedom in your life. Maybe you don't have a family yet. Maybe you don't have financial responsibilities that you take on as you get older.
More room for that follow through that's sort of required to.
Yeah. I mean, I was much more obsessive and focused on music and songwriting in my 20s and 30s than I am now at 60 years old. I still enjoy it, but I think if I still expected, Molly and I to have hit songs in Japan like we once did, I would be setting myself up for huge disappointment. And I have adjusted my expectations. Like, I would love to stay in it. And the fact that she and I can still sing and still write and it still sounds good, I'm really grateful for that. So if we can find a way to keep doing it, even if it just means putting out songs on Bandcamp and playing some house concerts, to me, that would still be really satisfying.
Yeah.
But I know, a lot of people might have had a lot more success than Molly and I had. And maybe that sets a different gauge in your ego and your expectations, where you think, why can't I keep having this? And that can be really difficult. I honestly, I feel like I'm really fortunate that over the years, I've found other creative things to do to make a living. If I had just been a musician and a songwriter and I was still depending on that, I would be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I was going to ask you about too, is just you have so many creative things going at once, whether it's songwriting, journalism, writing, a next book, doing cartoons, doing artwork. What do you think are some of the things that help you balance all those things? And do you ever feel like you just need 100% focus on one thing at a time? Or do you find that you can really go from one thing to another and still keep all your creative ideas moving forward?
I can go from one thing to another to a certain extent, but if something comes across my plate that requires a lot of focus, say, whenever I get a piece, a feature for Mojo, it takes over my life.
Right.
For probably a month. And that's all I think about, and that's all I work on. But I know that there's a deadline too. So it's not, at the end of that month, I turn it in, I make the adjustments, and then I have more freedom to pursue other things again.
Yeah, deadlines can really help, can't they?
Yeah, deadlines are great. I mean, deadlines have been part of my life really for 35 years, but they still make me anxious, and I guess that's good,
Yeah, they do. They make me anxious too, and I think it is good. It's sort of like the anxiety is there, and then I get to a point where I'm like, all right, fuck it, I'm just going to have to get up and do it, and I start doing it, and then it starts to feel good, and it gets done. And it's interesting because I think about shows and music too, and deadlines, and I recognize that sometimes you just schedule the show, and then you do all the work to get ready for it, and then you do the show, and then the show's over, and then the question is, okay, is there a next show? And when you're younger and you're doing the band thing, there might just sort of always be a next show on the horizon, or it might feel that way. And as I've gotten older, I sort of accepted that, like, it's okay to maybe just have the show and then, start all over again down the road when we're ready. What about this? What can you share about doing a live stream? And then the other question, you mentioned co-writing with people, sometimes over Zoom. What have you learned about, and they're related because, it's this kind of using the internet, which I think can make us feel isolated from music and listeners. But what have you learned about successfully using the internet for that stuff to feel like you're still connecting with everybody?
Well, Molly and I have only done 2 live streams, but I have to say both of them have been, first, really fun, and second, really satisfying in the way that they connected us with fans, because part of the thing with Swan Dive is really at least 50 or 60% of our fans are in Asia. So, we haven't seen them in person since 2008. It's a long time. So when we did our live stream in April, we publicized it, and we had people from South Korea, Japan, Thailand talking to us while we were playing, and that was really sweet. I mean, that first they cared enough to find time in their day or night, if it was 12 hours later or before, to be on there with us. So, I can't say that I'm a experienced live streamer. Like I know some people, especially during the pandemic, they did it every week, to build up, to kind of keep.
But I kind of appreciate the stories from people that just say, oh, we just, we didn't know what we were doing and we just did it, and maybe it still worked. So what did you guys decide to do for that? Did you get fancy with some microphones and a mixer and stuff like that? Or did you just sort of both sing in a room together and find that was a really good way to do it?
That's a really funny question, because the first time we did it, we went all out. It was the 20th anniversary of our record called June. This was in 2021. And we got a band together. We set up in my living room. I bought this special like internet friendly mixer. My brother came over and set up mics. I mean, it was like, and then we went through a company. I can't remember what they're called, but they specialize not only in live streaming and maximizing audio and video, but also feeding in like photos. And, it was like a production.
Mm-hmm.
And it was good. I mean, there were a couple snafus, but mostly it sounded really good. But the one that Molly and I did in April, we just did with my iPhone. I just put it on a tripod.
That's great.
That one sounded just as good to me, And then in a way, because there was less production value, it was just us sitting there next to each other, goofing around and singing. I think there was more charm to it in a way.
Yeah, it felt more like a house concert, maybe.
Yeah, where I thought, well, shoot, if we do this again, we don't need to be spending all this money and time, making a big production of it. Because I think anybody who tunes into a live stream, really what they care about most is seeing this person that they like and that they like their music. I mean, they don't care about the proper lighting and microphone. I mean, as long as they can hear the songs and see the person and feel like they're making a connection, that's success in live streaming.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make every episode of this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at iZotope.com. Speaking of which, speaking of lighting, the way we've got Zoom set up right now, and you've got the shades drawn, and it's drawing these stripes across your head. I feel like we're in like a Peter Gabriel video.
It's awful.
It's pretty amazing looking.
Yeah, well, hopefully the sun will move to a different spot.
It's great. I grabbed a couple of screenshots for you, so I'll send
it does look like a Peter Gabriel video.
It really does. Yeah, no, I think it's cool. And then what about the again, a nerdy question. So you got an iPhone going, and I do appreciate that, like keeping it simple when we try and think about using the internet and with our music for a live stream or for a, whatever, an Instagram post or whatever we're trying to do, a YouTube video. Did you still need to get clever about like having a laptop off to the side so that you could read the comments that people were typing in? Or do you guys still have great eyesight and you could just squint at the iPhone and see messages popping up?
It's funny. In the one we did in April, my mom came over because my mom loves Swan Dive and she loves Molly and she hadn't seen her in a long time. So my mom sat on the couch just out of frame with an iPad. And she kept tracking the comments. So she would just sort of read them like, oh, Kwano from South Korea says,
That's great.
Which added to the charm factor of it all,
Totally. I love that the greatest tech wizardry of all is just mom.
Yeah. With an iPad that she barely knows how to use. She's like, now, honey, what do I do now with this?
Pretty much right around the time I met you, Bill, was also when my brother and I went, took a banjo and accordion over to Paris and learned some songs and did a little busking in the subway for that was our 2-week vacation.
Fantastic.
And my mom was there too. And our most successful moment doing that was the day that mom joined us and went around with the hat to try and collect the money for us.
Of course.
Of course, we also got arrested by les gendarmes.
Oh, no.
For that, not having a permit to play in the Paris Metro.
Oh, man.
But oh, well. Okay, cool. So those are great tips. And that just reminds us that when we do stuff like that, keep it simple and because we can get stuck on all the technology of setting something up. And it probably turns out that just asking somebody to help, like your mom, somebody to actually like look at the comments and say like, oh, this question came in, is way more valuable, than setting up something really fancy. What about the Zoom songwriting question? So what have you learned about things that work well? I mean, I think the first thing we learn is, if you try and sing together, it doesn't work because we're out of sync or something,
Yeah.
And if you haven't tried that, rock stars, you'll discover that pretty quickly. You can't sing harmony with somebody over a Zoom call.
I find that Zoom is just one of several means of communication when you're trying to co-write a song. I still like to do it the old-fashioned way. We're just trading audio files or emails with lyrics. But at some point, the Zoom can be handy, if only to get on there face-to-face with somebody that's in a different city and discuss it. Right. Usually the song is sort of up and running. It maybe is missing a bridge or the lyrics for the third verse. And it helps to just have that face-to-face connection. And then if you do want to play something, like, one person can play it, the other person can react. And especially for like my friend David Meir, who lives in Sweden. I mean, I've written a lot of songs with David, but we've only been in the same room once. So I've never been to Sweden. He was in Nashville once or twice. That's when we met. So that's really handy if you're doing something where the people are separated by a lot of miles. And yeah, I mean, I've been surprised at how successful the songs that I've written over Zoom this year have turned out. Because at first I was kind of dubious about, like, I'd written songs long distance before, and I know there's challenges inherent in that. But I think both, however many people you have writing a song, if it's two people, if they're both on board with like, yeah, we're going to work on this separately, but we're using this as a means to get back together and refine it, then it can be a really valuable tool.
Now, do you think that your examples are ones where either one of you two writers could strum a guitar and sing the part, and so you could do that and then send it to somebody and then they can do the same thing to send it back? Or is it, does writing long distance still work if one of you is really just strumming chords and the other one sort of needs to be inspired and sing over them? Do you see things that work or present challenges that way?
Yeah, well, it's all different ways. I mean, I can think of two songs that I finished this year, one with Joe and one with David. In Joe's case, he had this beautiful song that didn't have words. It just had a melody. And he was just singing, la-las. And he sent it to me. And my role was I wrote the lyric to it. And then I wanted to make sure that the lyric was something that he would really feel and respond to emotionally. So, the melody spoke to me and kind of told me what the song should be about. So I started writing it, but I didn't want to just write something that he would go, oh, that's really good. I'm not sure I know where I fit in. So
right.
As I started to write it, I started to talk to him about it, and it was something that he could relate to. But then I wanted to know more about, like, how do you think about this? So I took some of what he told me and then put it into the lyric. With David, well, we've written all different ways, but there was one thing where I just had this title and this hook, and I just sent it to him. And I didn't really have, it was just a chorus, and I didn't really have any other idea for it. And he took it and he came up with a verse, and then we wrote a bridge together on Zoom. So it was all, kind of all, it was done in three different ways, and I don't know, with long distance writing, I really have done it all different ways. I've written lyrics to people's melodies. People have written lyrics to my melodies. We've traded bits of songs. Here's a verse. Can you come up with a chorus? This song needs a bridge. So it's just a means to an end, really. I still miss with my friend Mary. At least she lives here in Nashville, so we do get together, and I love that. There's nothing like being in a room with somebody.
Yeah. No, I feel like we would all agree. And again, in my experience, I was in a room with everybody when we were a band and we were in the same city. And then, later on, we're all in different places and we're always trying to figure out how do we keep the writing going. And
yeah,
we call them guitar sketches, and it's pretty loose. It's a loose arrangement, so it's easy for people to throw things back and forth, but it's hard to know if anybody's actually listening when you do that, It's
yeah,
like
that's true.
But again, it really does help those times when we schedule something and it's like, okay, here's a weekend, it's coming. We got a session down here, and then it's like, a little bit of mad scramble helps organize things. I know what I was going to ask you about. When you're writing lyrics and you're trying to, I guess lyrics, if the melody's already there, that helps. But do you sometimes write melody and lyric for people? And have you learned ways to make sure it's in the range that they can sing?
Yeah, that's interesting. I had an experience this year where I write songs for a company called Modern Works. They're in New York and Nashville and LA, and they're basically an ad.
By modern, they mean 1958.
Yeah,
no,
yeah, mid-century modern works. No, I mean they're an admin company in the same way that Bug Music used to be, but they also have pluggers. So it's kind of, they administrate my catalog. I own my publishing, but they also, not often enough for my taste, but they also work my songs, try to get them in TV shows. Anyway, occasionally they will start working with a young artist and they'll try to pair them up with co-writers. So they signed these young Canadian guys and they sent them down to Nashville to do a week of co-writing. And one of their appointments was with me. So I really did my homework. I listened to, they had put out one record. I listened to it. I figured out their vocal ranges. Their kind of a Everly Brothers-esque sounding group, like where the two lead guys, young guys, have really sweet voices and they harmonize a lot. Mm-hmm. So I came up with 3 ideas before they came to my house of songs that I thought would be right for them, for their voices. Like, I knew the key and the kind of emotional subject matter, just as a place to start. So when they came over, 2 of them came over, I played them these 3 ideas and they really responded to one of them. So we finished that idea together.
Yeah. Is that a little bit nerve-wracking when you have these ideas and people show up and you're like, what if they just don't like them?
Yeah, it really is. And again, honestly, that's a lot like what the Brill Building was. There's a great movie. It's not so much a great movie. It's I put it this way. It's one of my favorite movies about the music business. It's called Grace of My Heart. And it's loosely based on the life of Carole King and the Brill Building in the early 60s. And a lot of it is that where the songwriters, as in Nashville terms, cast a song for a particular artist. And then the artist comes in and you play it for them and hope that they love it. And
right.
Maybe even leave a little bit of it undone so they can contribute as a writer, which, as we all know these days, helps you get a recording. If the writer can have a little piece of the publishing, even though it's not necessarily ethical. So yeah, I could have finished all 3 of these songs on my own, but I thought, I've made a template here. So it's pretty much, there's a title, a verse, a chorus. Like all we have to do is finish the back half of it,
Mm-hmm.
That said, because I haven't mentioned the artist's name.
But you find it's useful to have the starting part of a song. And which leaves room for both melodic contributions, lyrical contributions. I guess it depends on who you're working with in any situation.
I knew that these people were from out of town, so I was probably only going to see them once. And they were probably writing, they had 2 appointments a day for a week. So they would probably benefit from somebody presenting them with something that's fairly well along, rather there's like, hey, what do you guys want to write about?
Right, right. Which so 2 appointments a day means they're writing they're writing with somebody before lunch and again after lunch.
Yeah,
like that.
The old-fashioned Nashville way, and that's a lot of pressure, And anyway, that was I've done that before. I haven't done it in a while, where it's usually young artists, and then in my experience, it's usually young artists who aren't all that experienced as songwriters. And that's why whoever their publishers, their managers are putting them together with people who are more experienced with the hope that, something good will come out of it.
So things like whether there should or shouldn't be a bridge.
Yeah. But I mean, you also, with the hopes of getting somebody to record something, you want to be sensitive to what they're feeling about it, and not... I have a subtle way of pressing my ideas and my taste on people without being forceful,
Right. You deliver it in an Oddbirds gift card.
And an Oddbirds gift card. Yeah.
They're like, wow, this is great. Nobody's ever given me a card before.
Yeah.
What about bridging your own experience with somebody else's? Like, if you're 60 and the kids are maybe in their 20s or something like that, what have you found helpful about having a topic in a song that might make sense for somebody else?
Oh, well, I once wrote a song in the early days of Swan Dive called Tears Are Always Young, which was a really good song, but I've always thought about that title because it doesn't really matter how old you are. I mean, emotional situations are universal. And I think, unfortunately, I don't, in some ways, I feel more emotionally wise and evolved than I did in my 20s and 30s on some days. Right. But some days it's like, no, I haven't learned anything, So I try to remember that. And, if you are, and in most cases, you are writing about some sort of relationship or emotional situation. Yeah. But then other times you're writing a story song, and that can be great too, because, it's not necessarily dependent on, am I 60, am I 28,
Right. You've got a character in mind. I felt like, it was one of the things I appreciated about Jill Sobule's writing too, is I felt like she was great at telling a story about a character, and Robin, of course, because they were always co-writing together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you co-write with Jill as well? I think you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. In fact, I probably said that moments ago in the intro.
I learned, I'll tell you what, I learned so much from writing with Jill. One of the things I always try to remember when I'm co-writing, because she was actually one of my first co-writers. I wrote by myself for a long time. And I was a big fan, so I was really nervous when I first started working with her. Jill does something that I refer to as keeping the ball in the air, where, you have different dynamics when you work with somebody in a co-writing situation. And I always think the most successful songs come out of keeping the ball in the air, where it's like a creative volley, where you don't retreat into yourself and there's not too much silence and too much second guessing. And keeping the ball in the air also means, the ball is the song, but the ball is also jokes about the song. The ball is also dirty variations on the lyric of the song. It's like all these things that Jill is so much fun to write with because she has so much energy, and she can be so funny and inappropriate. And from those moments where you think, well, that's not really related to the song, it leads you to something you might not have discovered in the song. So I really admire her energy. I mean, just as an example, I remember when I think about seeing Jill, like when she would be at Alex the Great, working with Brad and Robin on a record, and she would be in the control room, like sitting there with a guitar while they were, fussing with mic placements or something. You would walk in and you would be wearing like an orange sweater and a ball cap or something, and she would immediately start singing a song about an orange sweater, just like reacting to what was in the room in a funny way that was silly, but at the same time, there's a lesson there. It's like she's just in the moment. She's just reacting to things and being creative with them. And that's a great way to get songs up and running, is to have that kind of energy. So in a way, I think of all the people that I've written songs with, I've probably learned the most from Jill because of that.
Wow. No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments you need. From drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love to record real bands in my studio, but then I mix it up with cool sounds from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example, to make my music way more exciting and interesting. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off, or download the free gifts waiting for you, like the awesome new Jacob Collier Audience Choir or Complete Start, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of free samples at nativeinstruments.com. That's cool. And that reminds me, I need to reach out to Jill and see if she'll come be on the podcast to talk about writing songs sometime.
Oh yeah, you gotta get her.
Stories to tell.
Yeah.
So Rockstars, if you're not familiar with Jill Sobule, she wrote the original I Kissed a Girl.
I just saw 90s. Jill. She has an off Broadway show called Fuck the Seventh Grade. And I was in New York City a couple weeks ago, and I went to see her. And she has an all-female band on stage. And it's basically a narrative about her life as a misfit, with all of her songs, strategically placed to tell the story. And it was brilliant. And it was really moving and beautiful and funny. I was so happy for her. I mean, in a way, it kind of made me think, Jill has always belonged on stage in a narrative, like in a show like this, even though she's great just in a club setting too. But I think she really discovered something that could point to a future for her,
That's great. That's great. Well, let's see here. What about some of your experiences with co-writing with other people? What can you share a disaster story about co-writing?
Oh man,
you don't have to. You don't have to mention any names.
I won't mention names. I mean, I've had more than one disaster. I think a common disaster is going back to the situation that I was just referencing, where you get with somebody that you've never met, what is usually called the blind date co-write. And you're bringing in ideas, and you bring in something that you think is really great. And then you write it with the person, and it goes in a direction that you don't like. And the song gets finished and you're not happy with it. You're not proud of it. That to me, it's happened to me many times over the years. I try to get to a place now in a co-write where that doesn't happen, even if I have to go back and make tweaks, and say, hey, I keep thinking about our song. I love it, but I had an idea for this. Maybe we could switch this line, in a real gentle way. Like, it's not done. We need to keep working on it. It's not right.
You have to be on your toes, though, to recognize those things in the moment.
You do. And it's so sensitive, because especially with somebody you don't know, if they love it and you don't love it, to have that conversation it requires a lot of tact. And sometimes you can't get to the place where you can express your feelings about why the song still needs work and polishing. There have also been other ones, there have been co-writing sessions where you just sat, it was like a math test. You just sat there for like 3 hours.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, you didn't feel comfortable with the person, or the person was really critical of something you said, and you just withdrew into your notebook. And then at the end of the 3 hours, it's like, oh, fuck, just let me out of here.
Have you found it more helpful for co-writes to be one-on-one person, or what about if it's 3 people in a room writing together? Is that just as good, or is that challenging?
That's more challenging, I think. I've done several three-way co-writes over the years. The most successful of those have been with Jill and Robin, and that's mostly because I know them. So we have a friendship, and we come from similar places musically, so it was easier. But I've also done blind date 3-ways. Over the years, I've been to a couple of these songwriters weeks. Famously, Miles Copeland started this idea. I think he was the first one who did it at the Castle, over in France, where he'd invite 30 songwriters, and they would stay there for a week. And every day he would pair them up, either in 2s or 3s, and say, like, at the end of the day, you have to have a finished song and you have to perform it for us.
Wow.
Which is a lot of pressure, but good pressure. So I did that once in England with Chris Difford from Squeeze. He was the master of ceremonies. And then I did another one in Toronto with a bunch of Canadian songwriters, none of whom I knew. And that was, in some cases, it was really satisfying because really great creative work came out of it. But in other cases, it was so difficult because of people's personalities, and there would be a dominant voice trying to exert their control over a song, and the other 2 people would be like, where do I fit in? Do I get to say something? And you might say something and it gets shot down. So yeah, the three-way dynamic is really challenging. That's why sometimes in modern songs, when I look and there's like 5 or 7 names on a song, I'm like, how the fuck?
They can't. It's not 5 or 7 in the room at the same time, I bet.
It can't be. It has to be like we sampled this guy's drum track, or
it just goes, the song, the singer, the artist goes on to the next producer, and then they work on it a little more. And then they go on and work on it a little more. But I mean, I do see that. I mean, it's hard to know the intricacies of each song as it gets created, but I do see examples of things that, become hits, or, certainly become hits enough that I'm listening to it in the car with my kids or daughter or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm struck by how that process can really work. And, it's interesting. It's like, who knows along the way what gems in this song might have died on the the cutting room floor. But in the end, this, maybe one of the first records I thought about this stuff was like Gwen Stefani or something. You see an artist go through with different writers and different producers and different stages of making a record, and the stuff rises to the top, and it's great. But it makes you wonder. It's like, maybe somebody just added the bridge. Maybe they just, put in the initial beats. Maybe somebody else came along and added the last flourishes. And I always wonder if, lyrics keep getting changed right up till the end.
Well, there's that whole phenomenon. When I started writing songs, 30 some years ago, I never heard the expression top liner. And now,
right, it seems like such a modern thing.
Yeah, and it is. There are people who are specialists in that one skill, where they come in at the end of a song and sculpt the melody so it has a bit more, melodic variation, I suppose, and interval jumps, and just making it more distinct is their job. Which when I first heard of that, I was like, really? Like, shouldn't that have been the melody writer's job to get it right in the first place? But I guess these days, we live in a world of specialization, in a way where, people have jobs where they just do one thing in the process. And yeah, I would guess I would guess all aspects of the song probably benefit, of modern songs probably benefit from having that breakdown. Maybe there is somebody. I would love to be the lyric doctor. I wish I could I wish I could carve out that job for myself, because I'm really good at I think maybe just magazine work too. I'm a really good editor, and I could really help people. It's like, you have a good lyric here, but this line is a little cliche and tired. We can find a fresh way to say this, and I could come in and just make that one or two change. And it's like, oh, that word change made the whole thing sing, brought it to a different level.
Yeah, I think it's so true. I mean, and there's probably so many layers where the power of editing can come into play. And maybe that's what you're describing, the arrival of something like a top line is just that with modern production and the ability to keep revisiting things, there's maybe more opportunities to just keep editing little features of it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a beat editor down the road who comes back in and reworks the groove a little more.
I'm sure there is. I mean, that really does go a long way towards explaining why there are 7 names on a song.
Yeah. And in the lyric thing, it's fascinating because I find there's great power in having no editor in the room mentally, figuratively speaking. We have to turn off our internal critic in that initial stage, and probably in a lot of stages actually of making a song and making a record. But yet we probably need to remember to turn that editor back on after that stage. It's like you almost have to have this like free moment without constraints, and then something comes out and gets you excited about the music, but you have to remember to go back and like, all right, work on it a little harder, work on it a little more. Cause no matter what I do, I might do something and be really excited about how this song turned out. And I come back later, I'm like, wait a minute, does this really make sense? Or like, why did I use the wrong, preposition or pronoun or whatever part of the song lyric. Like I could have said that better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you have a really good co-writing relationship with another person, it can expedite that process because it sometimes happens in real time.
Right.
If I'm writing with somebody like David Mead, or Boo Hewerdine, they're both really great melodicists and lyricists. So as we're writing, if there's a line that you're like you said, you're unsure if the meaning is clear or if it's maybe a little hackneyed or something, the other person sometimes will be able to recognize that immediately, and you go back and forth and you change it.
What does hackneyed mean again?
Hackneyed means tired and overused, like a hack,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cliche.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. Cliche is a funny one. I find myself sometimes working with songwriters where I'm trying to contribute just as a producer. I'm trying to help them, make their best stuff. And I find myself trying to explain to people what cliche is, because I also recognize it pretty quickly at times. I might not recognize it in my own work, but I can recognize it in somebody else's.
Yeah.
And it's tricky. And I think about it, I'm like, how do you explain to somebody that something's cliche, maybe without calling it that, or maybe explaining why, this particular lyric runs the risk of being cliche?
I mean, you can pose, what I would do is just pose a question and let it hang in the air without saying like, that's bad, or we need to change it, saying like, but isn't that line,
you can't think of a cliche when you need one, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. Like without you, about you, say, which is in so many songs, keep thinking about you, can't live without you. Right. To say, well, isn't that something that we've heard a lot before? Like maybe there's a different twist on that. just sort of posing that question and inviting the other person to think that way too, without criticizing them. Because as I said, the dynamic in the co-write, especially with somebody you don't know well, is so fragile because you're putting your ego out there, and you do have to say dumb, stupid things to get to the good stuff. So you never want to be critical of somebody. You want to find ways to invite them to think a little deeper about it,
Yeah. A line that comes to mind for me would be using, from the bottom of my heart as a lyric in a song. And then for me, it's pausing to think about, okay, so there are these expressions that we use, but we don't really own them. They're not, they sometimes expressions, they become commonplace, but they might have meant something unique when they first appeared, but now we're just using them and we know the intention, but there's no actual meaning to us. Like what the hell is the bottom of my heart? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'll try and think of, or suggest maybe there's a way to say something that is true to ourselves and our own experience.
It's funny that we're talking about this because I was listening to Dolly Parton's new album, which is called Rockstar, where she has collaborated with all these.
Oh, she wrote it for this podcast?
Yeah, she wrote it for this podcast. Where, it's 30 songs. I think she wrote 8 of them. And then it's all famous covers like Stairway to Heaven and Baby, I Love Your Way. Anyway, she covers Every Breath You Take with Sting. And I was listening to it, and I don't like it as much as the version by the Police, but I hadn't heard the song in a while. And it occurred to me that, when that song starts and you're hearing those lyrics could be from a 1950s doo-wop song. They're so basic, until he reframes it and says, I'll be watching you, which that completely changes the emotional context of it. So there's a really important lesson for songwriters too. Is there is a power in using cliches like bottom of your heart, if you can find a way to reframe it and put a twist on it where people hear it, it's like, whoa, that's not what I think of when I think of bottom of my heart, but that's cool and resonant. So,
that makes a lot of sense. In 2024, Adam Audio will celebrate 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Adam Audio are unveiling a very special limited edition series of monitors that will look gorgeous in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series, available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself. The clean, glossy white finish exudes a decadent feel and will stand out in any studio or in-home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V have the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Adam Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as amazing as your music. Don't miss out on the new limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. I am super impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by measuring the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want. Using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, you simply adjust the settings to your own taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means that you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval, the band absolutely loves the way our records sound thanks to iZotope and Ozone. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Light over at iZotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the second half of the show, aka the jam session. I still don't know what that means, but that's what I call it. My guest today is Bill DeMain, joining us from across town at his studio. Bill, you ready to jam?
I'm ready to jam.
All right, cool. It just it gives us something to say. That's why I call it the jam session.
Got it.
So you were talking about the power of cliche when you give it a new perspective. It's like you're looking at it from a new angle. In lyric, what are some things that come to mind for you about song arrangement and musical parts? Do you think that that same kind of thinking applies really effectively to that?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think if you're writing pop songs, you always have to be conscious about what's come before and what's satisfying. I mean, you just think about how many songs from the 1920s to now use 1 major to 6 minor, 2-5-1. I mean, just those kind of sounds in music that are so ingrained in our psyches, whether we're young or old. They just satisfy something, you know. And again, if you can find ways to use those but put a twist on them, that's usually something that people will enjoy. You know, if you're just being slavish to like an old form and it just sounds like a 50s song, it's just going to sound dated and not very interesting. So yeah, I think there's power in cliche if you can harness it and tweak it, both musically and lyrically.
It seems like an obvious thing when I think about hip hop music in the era of sampling. I was just going back and listening to, 90s hip hop in the car the other day, and it was reminded me there were so many songs, and it still happens today where some sample or some musical quote happens and it reminds you of a previous hit, and then the new song is made from that. So, and like that's an obvious version of it, but you're right. You're absolutely right that without, prior to sampling, just musically quoting other things is something that has been around for ages. It's like,
oh yeah,
finding ways to quote things. I wonder if they did it. They must have done it in classical compositions too.
Yeah, I don't know enough about classical music, but I would guess there was a lot of borrowing going on. Right?
Yeah, I mean people wouldn't have a recording of it, but they'd hear a performance of it potentially. So,
yeah. I mean, that's part of art is, if you read the letters of Vincent van Gogh, even when he was kind of learning to draw and paint, he's talking about going to the museum and sitting there before paintings of the old masters like Goya and copying them, line by line, so he can understand how they're made. And then he'll do a drawing that's his own, but still is Goya-esque. So I think the idea of influence and copying runs all through art.
So do you think that was when he had 2 ears or 1 ear?
That was probably when he had 2 ears.
Okay, but I'm glad you brought that up because art is such a great topic when we think about creating music too. And you've found ways to integrate it personally into what you create. You're actually physically creating art out of collages, you're doing cartooning. Those things probably can integrate and inform the musical creations too, which I do want to hear you talk about that. But talk also about, like, do you ever find it helpful to go to the art museum to find inspiration for songwriting? Or do we not even need to do that? Maybe all we need to do is just walk out of our front door of our house and like Jill Sobule, we find it with the first orange sweater that we see.
I'll tell you what comes to mind when you ask me that. Some years ago, I was in New York City working on songs with Teddy Thompson and Kelly Jones for a record called Little Windows that the three of us wrote together. And we were there for 10 days. We would meet every day and write songs. And one day, towards the end of the afternoon, I went out to get lunch for us, like pick up some sandwiches. And I came back, and Teddy and Kelly had come up with this piece of music, this melody that was really cool. And they said, we can't think of any words for it, So I took that melody, and the next morning before we met, I put it in my iPhone and put in buds, and I just walked around the Lower East Side. A really different environment for me, so different than my life and my environment here in Nashville. And I really believe that there was something in the energy of New York City, just like the feeling on the streets and all those things that I was seeing that were so unfamiliar, that stimulated me. And I wrote the entire lyric in an hour, just walking around. So
wow,
I think there's something to be said, whether it's an art museum or whether it's just an unfamiliar environment. It stimulates your brain. I really believe that. And in such a good way. I wish I did more of that, like, especially since the pandemic. I feel like I've been so isolated in a lot of ways. Haven't left my home, haven't traveled as much as I used to. But I'm a big proponent of getting out and interacting and seeing things,
I think that the nice thing about going out and seeing people is just watching people watching. There's always sort of like a story you can find. And maybe in some ways that's different from an art museum where the art is sort of created with purpose and intention. So it's almost like artwork might be trying to tell us a particular story, and people watching, you're seeing the real story, like they say, truth is stranger than fiction a lot of times. What about and also reminds me of, when you talk about being out there, for me, I feel really inspired by music when I'm driving long road trips. I listen to stuff and all of a sudden I hear it. But the great struggle is always like, God, how do I hold on to this idea that I just had for this thing I'm listening to, or the song or the music? And, or how do you hold on to a lyrical idea as you write a song? So do you have tricks for yourself that help you, walk around the streets of Manhattan and write the lyric and remember what it is later when you get back to the studio? Or are you just sharp as a tack?
No. I mean, I can draw from one experience like that. I can draw a lot of energy from it over a period of time, even when I'm back home. That sense memory, whether it's photographs or even if you made like a little audio recording. Like, I love to record on my phone just the sound. When I was in New York City recently, just the sound of like the Middle Eastern taxi driver as we're driving, like he's talking to somebody else, and it's that just real rapid fire, all those kind of sounds. I find they're so different than what I experience day to day here in Nashville that I love having a record of them,
Yeah.
Even just to kind of take me back there. So yeah, I think there's little tricks that you can draw on, just try that. I think one of the best pieces of advice for anybody who's trying to be creative, whether it's songwriting or cartooning or writing, And it's so hard for all of us now to do this, is to actually be in the moment. Let your senses interact with what's happening instead of immediately reaching for your phone and letting your phone document what's happening. We have, our senses are way more interesting and powerful than what's on an iPhone, but we forget that. I forget it sometimes.
And the thing about iPhones is they're so powerful as far as all these things they can do for us. There's an app that will let me write notes in it. There's one that would let me look up the definition of something. And the same time, there's there could be a rhyming dictionary in there. There's
Absolutely.
the voice memo for capturing something. But the problem is with them is the moment I pick them up, they're more interested in guiding me than listening to me. They want me to pay attention to something else. And it really throws me off so quickly.
Yeah. And it's, on the eve of AI becoming so prominent in all different ways, that's only going to be more challenging to actually have your own personality and thoughts not shaped and interrupted,
Yeah. It's interesting that topic comes up with you too. I mean, it's so pervasive in many, many discussions, but as far as anybody, as far as me feeling like it's something that I use regularly or other people using regularly, I'm not too convinced by that yet. Is there more you want to say on that particular topic, or is that good enough?
Yeah, I will say this. I think
you're a writer, so obviously in composing text, it can be a very valuable tool as a process too. There are people who you can go over and you can tell it to write you a song and it'll spit out the lyrics for something. And it's kind of a fun exercise.
Yeah, I've tried that. I've just recently, I'm so old school when I interview people. Up until recently, I still just used a tape recorder with a cassette. And then I would take the cassette and put it in an old mid-century modern transcribing machine and sit at my desk and listen to it with a foot pedal.
Amazing. And you can rewind it and pause it and play it.
So just recently, really in the last year, I've started using this app called Otter AI, which can listen to recorded text, a recorded interview, and transcribe it. I'm still not convinced that it's faster than what I can do with the transcribing pedal, because it transcribes it, but there's so many mistakes because AI doesn't understand jargon and technical terms and names, that sometimes that's comical, but it requires a lot of going back through it and making sure, because especially when you're quoting somebody who's a well-known artist, like you need to get it right, word for word. So that's one thing of AI. The other thing that I do worry about is that for the last 15, 20 years, all the magazines that I work for, the deal that I have with them as a freelancer is I write something and they own it. So they can take whatever I wrote about Roxy Music and put it into a Roxy Music database and have AI just keep writing retrospective articles about Roxy Music that could be published. And I wouldn't get any money for that. So that's what
it threatens livelihood in that way.
It definitely does. And when you hear of a lot of writers, like well-known writers like Michael Chabon and Stephen King banding together and like suing OpenAI for stealing their content, I get it,
That's interesting. I think about, you talk about correcting the mistakes that it makes too. And it reminds me of how powerful it is when I mishear or missee something and it kind of tickles me, the way that I misheard something. And it doesn't tickle me the way that, the bots mishear what was said and mistranscribe it. But I wonder if it tickles them. I wonder if the AI bot will be just as tickled by its own misperception of things as we are of our own.
I don't know. I mean, that's, I think if if in our lifetimes, if AI develops a sophisticated sense of humor, that would be scary. It would be remarkable, but it would be scary too, because sense of humor is so precise and refined and individual and quirky in a way,
Yeah. Speaking of which, I'm
Yes.
flipping over to your Instagram right now.
Which one? I've got two.
You do have two. This is Oddbirds, I believe.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, Oddbirds 1. Maybe there's more an Oddbirds 2 also. I don't know. But I thought I'd read one. So if you don't mind, can I quote one of your Instagram posts live on the podcast right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Rockstars, here's one. It's a cartoon drawing of two swans face to face in a swan pond. I'm guessing this is maybe Boston Commons. I'm just going to throw them in Boston Commons for you. And one swan looks like a real swan, and the other one looks like the new Cybertruck from Tesla, and that's because it's made out of origami. It says, and the real swan is saying to the other one, honestly, Greg, we're all pretty tired of hearing about your trip to Japan.
I was really happy with that cartoon. I drew that, and it took me 3 weeks to come up with that caption. I drew it because I just thought it was funny, and I thought this is a good idea for a cartoon. I don't know what it should say. And then I must have tried 10 or 15 captions over those 3 weeks until I hit on that one. And it made me laugh, and I thought that's the right one.
That's great. That's great. Now, when you draw this stuff, do you still go back to 1950s tools and implements of creativity, or do you find that things like an iPad and an iPad pencil are really useful, modern stuff?
I need to get that app that everybody uses called Procreate, which is drawing on their pad. I love paper and I love pens. So yeah, I'm still drawing the old-fashioned way, where I draw first with pencil and then I ink it over and I erase the pencil. And then sometimes I'll use a little bit of watercolor to add dimension.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all crave captivating sounds that elevate our music to the next level. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate creative companion, offering a vast library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're crafting hip-hop beats, indie pop melodies, classic rock anthems, serene meditation tracks, pulsating dance floor hits, or intricate orchestral compositions, Native Instruments' complete bundle has you covered. From drums, loops, and beats to dynamic synths, lifelike strings, and vintage instruments like electric bass, guitars, and keys, the possibilities are endless. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off, or download the free gifts waiting for you, like the awesome new Jacob Collier Audience Choir and Complete Start, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. It is fun to draw with the real stuff. It really is. I mean, it's fun to do the digital things too, but half the time I feel like I'm spending, it's kind of like the iPhone. I feel like I'm spending half the time trying to read the help doc on how to do something.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm taking notes on all my podcasts and it's just a pencil and paper. I mean, I got all the digital stuff in front of me, but there's nothing beats a pencil and paper, and my handwriting sucks and I'm a really slow writer, and it's still more useful. So I understand that. Now there's another one. I wanted to just share one more. So this one,
sure. This
one really cracks me up. There's and Rockstars, these are Instagram posts that are, the cartoon frames. What do you call them? You call it a frame of a cartoon, right?
Yeah. Panel.
Yeah. Okay. A panel. Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of. So this one is It looks like this, the porch, side porch of a house, and there's a yard there, and then there's a pumpkin, a worried-looking pumpkin, who's looking over at a piece of pie that's sitting next to him. The piece of pie, it's pumpkin pie, and it looks a little dejected, slightly forlorn, and the big pumpkin, carved pumpkin, is saying to the other piece of pie, "Didn't I tell you not to leave the porch?" Question mark.
Yeah, that was during October I was drawing Halloween related cartoons, but I mean, part of it's interesting. Since I've started cartooning, I've started thinking in terms of jokes and punchlines in a way that's I think really stimulating to my imagination, because you start thinking about pumpkins, and then you start thinking about, like, what do pumpkins turn into? I mean, they can be pie. These days, there's so much stuff like pumpkin spice tea,
Right.
But
It could have been a Starbucks pumpkin spice latte or something.
Yeah, right. But there was just something funny to me about, because I think because the shapes are so different, because
Right.
the pumpkin itself is such an iconic holiday shape. And usually when you see pumpkin pie, like, you don't see anything of that iconic holiday shape in it. So to have them next to each other just seemed really funny to me. It was sort of like, oh yeah, these two things are related. Even though when you put them together, like, the pumpkin itself almost has a kind of superiority. It's like, see, it's like we were this beautiful thing. You went off and you got mashed up and put in a pie.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when I saw it, I immediately got it. And then it's funny, as I was reading it and trying to retell it, I started to second guess my own ability to interpret it. It's a funny thing about, humor. It's like, there's that element that just, you get it, but if you think about it too hard, you might unravel it also,
Oh yeah.
It's like you can't explain the joke.
Well, one thing, as I've gotten interested in cartooning, I've been reading a lot of interviews with famous cartoonists and listening to interviews. And one guy, he draws for the New Yorker a lot. His name is Joe Dater. Joe said, really 60-70% of cartooning is writing. And that made me feel good, because that's what more of my experience is. But it's true. I mean, sometimes I'll have a cartoon and I will just labor and obsess over the caption, like the word order. Like, where should this word fall? Should there be a qualifier like just or pretty? Or, how do I make this sound like conversational?
Like lyrics.
Yeah, it is like lyrics. But it's even, in a way, it's even more concise. And because you're trying to make people laugh, it's, there's also that element of what makes me laugh. That's the best I can hope for, is like, if I can make myself laugh, then hopefully somebody else will.
Did you ever dabble in or consider dabbling in stand-up comedy?
Oh man, I love stand. I probably pay more attention to stand-up comedians these days than I do musicians. I feel like people like Neil Brennan and Todd Barry and Tom Segura. I think all these people, they're really funny, but they're also kind of modern philosophers. Like, they're deep thinkers. And Mark Maron's that way too. I love his WTF podcast. So yeah, in my mind, I have bits and routines. I don't think I would have the courage, though, to get up on stage without a guitar and face an audience and try to make them laugh. I wish I could.
Did you find it easy to do the inter-song banter when you're on stage?
Yeah, I thought I was always pretty good at that too. But again, it's because I was up there with Molly, and I had a guitar, and I knew that we were soon going to return to a comfort zone of songs.
Right. All right. Well, so let me ask you this question. When you're creating and we'll go back to songs, when we're writing songs, I think we can find ourselves, asking the questions about what we're writing about. So it could be like, it could be pop song focused, meaning what we write about should work for everybody and should be sort of a common language, I guess. There can be the art rock side of songs where, it's cool just because it's cool. And maybe it means something directly, or maybe it means something through some other osmosis. And then there's the humor aspect too, which you just talked about. Talk a little bit about your feelings on all that, and then also how you like to spin back the creative artwork. The cartoons, the drawings, the Oddbird stuff into songwriting yourself.
I mean, are you asking, are they all related? Is that?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess, are they all related? And do you feel like there's, when you're doing lyric editing, do you find that you have to carefully strike the balance between something being kind of arty and meaningful in an abstract, expressionist painting kind of way versus something that's familiar and everybody gets it?
That really does depend on who's singing the song. I mean, if you're Crowded House, you have established a style of lyric writing which is very impressionistic and poetic and doesn't necessarily have to make linear sense, but you can still tell the singer, Neil Finn, believes in what he's singing, and he probably knows. No, I don't. Having interviewed him, I will say he probably doesn't always know exactly what he's singing about. But then again, if you're a country singer, then things have to, for the most part, for most country singers, things have to be very clear, and understandable. So I think the context defines the style. Part of the frustrating thing for me is I love all styles. Like I love impressionistic, abstract lyrics. I love like old Yes lyrics, like
Right.
Close to the Edge. I find those so fascinating and beautiful. Yet I know there's a kind of hippie drug element to them too. It's like mountains move out of the sky and they stand there. It's like, really? What does that mean? But it's such a beautiful phrase, and it sounds so good when you sing it, that I think there's a place for that, just as there's a place for a straight ahead old fashioned Beatles song like I Want to Hold Your Hand. So I've always tried as a songwriter to be someone who could do all of those things. That was my goal. Is I always wanted to be able to be put in any situation with any artist of any style and be able to contribute something. So that my whole musical career, even though I was in a band that had a particular style, my hope was that I would always get to exercise those various muscles. That's one of the reasons I like co-writing so much, because there's so many different kinds of singers that you work with that have different styles and might be more accepting of abstract things or might want something super clear. And I love that challenge,
Well, it must help to know a little bit about what their writing style is. You even said when the young duo came to write with you, you had already been studying their previous records. So you had a feel for it.
Yeah. I
You're
mean,
blind,
I think
right?
if you want to be somebody who is kind of a jack of all trades musically, you do have to have, it's not even so much an ability, just willingness to study something. Like I've written, when I was in college, I wrote several musicals. And before I moved to Nashville, I had a moment of considering moving to New York and pursuing musical theater, because I love it and I still love it. I've never really gotten back to it, but that's all I did when I was in college. Is I just wrote musicals. And I love the freedom of being able to use sophisticated language and lots of fancy rhymes, which you can't really get away with so much in pop music. So yeah.
I've learned a lot more than I ever thought I'd learn about musicals by growing up with a household of daughters. You know, my daughter and my stepdaughters when they were younger, and their family being really interested in it. And I mean, I really was not I just wouldn't have been a fan before. And then I've learned a ton more. I think the one that really put me over the edge was really listening to Annie.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were listening to that in the car for a while. And I was like, wow, this is really, really great. You know, the songs, it's fascinating how musicals can have songs that are catchy, but they're also, you know, they're not pop songs. You know, they're like, they tell a story and they accompany something going on stage potentially. And musically, they can be more complex and expressive than just a 4/4 beat. But then you have somebody come along like, oh shoot, what was the name of the wedding movie where they took all the ABBA songs?
Oh, Mamma Mia, yeah.
Mamma Mia, yeah, thank you. Where you see that. And then there was also the one, Chicago, was it, that took all the pop songs and turned them into the musical songs for it. That it's clever when people like take the pop song and they turn it into the musical too. So anyway, that was just a little comment on musicals.
They call that the jukebox musical.
The jukebox musical. There you go. Now, what about for you? Are there some things that still either still feel like, or they're typical big hurdles for you in songwriting? And then the other part of that is, have you always liked your own voice?
My singing voice?
Yeah, just writing music, even if you're not singing, you know, we have a voice, but particularly when we get on the microphone and we sing, we have to sort of find our voice and get comfortable with it. And I know that can be a real challenge, still a challenge for me. And I wondered, you know, if you had thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, for the first part of your question, there are definitely still things that I would like to do. One of them being getting back to musical theater. I'm always on the lookout for ideas that could be turned into a musical. So that, you know, that may be my next move. At the same time, in the years since Swan Dive has been super active, I've made several solo EPs. And in doing that, I guess I've made 4. In doing that, I've gotten to like my singing voice more than I used to. And I also do something, I post a lot of these on my other Instagram, Walk in Nashville. I could send you a link to that. I've been doing for the last 2 years a lot of these a cappella things where I cover songs like One Night in Bangkok or Me and My Arrow, just with 4 voices. And that has that's been really helpful to me to learn how to build harmonic arrangements. And yeah, I mean, part of the thing in Swan Dive is Molly is such an exceptional singer that I always just thought she's the lead singer. And I sing with her sometimes, and that's a nice sound. But I never really felt like, honestly, I loved her voice, but I felt intimidated by it too, because she's such a natural, you know, and has perfect pitch and can harmonize like anything. And so I always felt a little sheepish on the mic. In all those years we were working with Brad and making Swan Dive records, there would be one song on the album where I would sing lead. And I always felt like, oh man, you know, this is going to be the song that nobody wants to listen to.
They're just being nice to me.
They're just being nice to me. So part of the thing post Swan Dive in making my own records is, you know, I don't think I'm a great singer, but I think I've got a sound, and I don't mind the sound of my voice anymore, because I figured out ways, like my voice sounds really good when I double it, in the same way that like Nilsson used to double his voice. My voice sounds really good when I sing counterpoint. And so that's inspired me to explore a lot of that kind of harmony singing. So Yeah. I mean, I don't know how those two things tie together, writing a musical.
No, I think you're preaching to the choir too, in a good way, because this podcast, Recording Studio Rockstars is those of us who are doing what we do have learned something about recording, and and there's a good chance we got there because we had the tech skills, and maybe we were good at recording somebody else who was good at singing and got all that attention.
Yeah.
And that's certainly my story. The bands I started out in, I was never the lead singer, and it's still hard for me to put myself in that place. So I'm in this place where I'm trying to do more of that. And first thing I discover is that I really love doubling my voice too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found about writing that was helpful was to learn to trust my first instinct on stuff too. So I might, if I'm looking for a melody, I might sing some lyrics and let that very first melodic idea stick as long as I can, and go back in and like rework it and double it and be really surprised by like, oh wow, that really worked out, kind of thing. Whereas if I turn on the internal critic, it's so easy for me to be a naysayer. It's very easy to be an armchair critic for myself.
Yeah, me too. I think everybody struggles with that,
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah, it's a lot easier to listen to stuff and go like, yeah, it's pretty good, than it is to listen, get excited, and keep pushing forward. So doubling your voice, what are other things that you've had to go through as far as a singer that you had to take some wrong turns and kind of find your way? As far as like, have you learned that you'll steer too much in one direction and you should just relax and let it come out naturally? Do you find that it's the opposite? It's like, no, it's the first take isn't the one. I should try harder and work on it more, like stuff like that?
I think first of all, one of the things that helped me like my voice better is not always wishing that I had a different voice.
Right.
Because for so many years, it's like, God, I wish I could sing high like Geddy Lee or Steve Perry, or, just have this incredible range, or be able to scream like Paul McCartney, like all these things that I couldn't do. But then when I started thinking, it's like, I have a baritone, like a really resonant, nice sounding lower voice. Once I started to embrace that and not try to write songs that were way out of my range, that helped me like my voice a lot better. I also, it's funny, since I've been recording my own stuff on my EPs, I've gotten really fussy about not using or using a minimal amount of auto-tune. Like I really want to sing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So that means often a lot of takes. And it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of comping. It just means maybe doing like 10 takes and like the eighth take is pretty good all the way through. And I'll just fix a few things,
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not a first take kind of guy, but one of the luxuries of being able to record at home, which I never had when we were working in the studio with Swan Dive, is it's like, okay, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm singing. My voice sounds really good right now. I'm going to just sing. Where, I had one shot at Alex the Great. It's like 3 PM, and maybe my voice, aside from being nervous, like my voice wasn't in the best place. But that was it. I had to go with it,
Yeah, voices are interesting. Like we have whatever's going on with us personally. We've got the time of day, the humidity, the air,
Everything.
the temperature. We're hungry or not. maybe we just had a cold last week or whatever it is. There's
I know.
allergies.
There's so many and you can't really even figure them out. So, I mean, obviously, when you first wake up, that's maybe not the best time to sing unless you're going for a certain sound. But I still can't explain why some days I seem to have a bigger range than other days. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, do you also have, do you ever try and exercise your voice? Do you have warm-up routines or ever try and do any training to sort of expand your singing abilities? Or do you find that it's
a little bit? I mean, it's funny. I started doing more vocal exercises for my walking tour than I did for singing.
Right, because that's probably exhausting to talk on those tours, right?
Yeah, like a typical one is like, why do I fly in the sky so high? And you say like, why do I fly in the sky so high? Why do I fly in the sky so high? Just using the whole range of your voice. And it is helpful because we as Americans tend to speak not in such a monotone, but kind of in like a three or four note range, where that's why, if you listen to people from Great Britain or India, like their voices are more musical, the way they jump around. So I wanted my presentation as a tour guide to have more music in it. So that's why I started doing those exercises. And then sometimes I do those same exercises before I sing. They just kind of remind me, it's like your voice can be elastic. It doesn't have to just be this fixed thing,
Yeah. So you're basically saying that in America, we keep our vocals in the lazy boy range.
We're in the lazy boy range. Yeah.
No, but I mean, like vocal warm-ups, what I've learned about that stuff is, our voice, it's a muscle. It's just like anything else. It needs, you don't want to go out for the big soccer game and just immediately burst into a sprint after sitting in the car. You got to stretch and warm up and, get limber, and then you can actually do the stuff. And it's true in singing too. And, I've spent more of my time doing background vocals, where somebody else did the lead, but I'm taking over. I'm going to do more leads, I promise. But but even in the background stuff, you hear, and I'm sure you're this way, Bill, too. I mean, as a composer, we hear all the harmonic possibilities. We hear, there could be a great harmony in there, and it could be up high. And then sometimes you go to sing it and you're like, damn it, it's not working. I can't do it. I tried it in falsetto or whatever. But there are also tricks sometimes that I've learned to be able to do where stopping and then resting and then doing a little bit of a warm-up routine and then go back and sing it again. And all of a sudden there's that high note, and you're in a studio. So now that you captured it, you got it,
Oh yeah.
So it's good to learn those things and come up with your exercises like that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what you were just saying. Is like, it is taking little breaks. And sometimes when I take a little break, I'll put on just like 30 seconds of a singer that I really admire, just to kind of soak in their voice and see, not to imitate them, but just kind of like be close to something that's really beautiful and resonant. Or other times, I might just take a little sip of whiskey or something, just something that like will relax me or just help change my state of mind, and then I'll step back up to the mic and try it again, you know?
Now, do you find that it's also useful to do the opposite, like where you have to step more into character to do the thing you're recording? Because I mean, like when I think about singing in character, whatever that means to me on a particular song, sometimes I'll get excited, but I'm like, yes, that's the way to do it. And then I go back and I realize, oh, it's impossible to sing a harmony to that because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Or it's hard to double it, versus, really relaxing. I mean, do you find that, or just what are your thoughts about that? The character voice versus the relaxed and precise and no vibrato kind of singing?
Well, the way that I can say that I've applied that, on some of the stuff that I've recorded where there's lots of background vocals, I've actually tried to make it so there's 3 or 4 different kinds of singers singing those parts. So one guy might have a little bit more air in his voice. One guy might have just a touch more, force or vibrato or something, even though it's still going to all be me. It's kind of like, and I can't remember, I think it was Matthew Sweet. I heard an interview with him one time talking about, because he does all his own background vocals, that he does this, where he'll try to distinguish each voice with a slightly different characteristic. And his feeling is that it makes the background vocals not only sound bigger, but more interesting if it's not just him at the mic, just always being Matthew Sweet,
That's cool. That's a great way to think about it. I wonder if he comes up with names. Maybe, have you thought about naming your characters?
I haven't gone that far. No. And
Yeah,
I'm certainly not as sophisticated as him, but,
Well, they each need their own Oddbird character.
Yeah.
And then you can do an ensemble. That'd be pretty sweet, man. An Oddbird a cappella video. Now, when you were talking about doing the a cappella productions, are you actually using the app called Acapella, or do you have some other way of?
I do use that app.
That's a pretty fun one.
I usually, I cheat. I usually record. It's not cheating, but I record it on Pro Tools, except for the lead vocal. And then I play it back and I sing with myself, like the stacked parts,
Yeah. All right.
But it's still a cappella. It's just because I've tried it a few times with my iPhone and the a cappella app, and it doesn't sound as good,
When you're stacking your own vocals in Pro Tools, what are some tricks you've learned to make it easy for you to hit the notes right and get the parts right and the timing and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I don't really like to, when I'm doing like a lot of harmony parts, like a big stack, I don't like to listen to the previous parts. Even if I'm doubling, I don't like to do that. I like to just sing it as best I can and then put the whole picture together after. Because I find like sometimes if I start singing to doubled and tripled parts that are already there, then I get a little tentative about the new parts. I also did a song this past year called Lone Ranger that was very much a kind of nod to ELO. And there's about 40 background vocal parts in it. It's like a massive part. And I was talking to a really good friend of mine named Bleu. His name is Bleu McCauley, really great pop songwriter out of LA. And Bleu had a side project called LEO, where he did a whole record that sounded like ELO. He wrote all these songs in that style. And I was asking him, I said, so I've recorded all these vocal parts for this song in this ELO style. How did you get yours to have that Jeff Lynne sound? And he told me, he said that the secret is every part, you have to sing it 4 times. And then hard pan it. So 2 to the left, 2 to the right, 2, and that's how I mixed the song. And he was right. There was something like when you put everything hard panned like that and they were doubled, and also sung in tune, which was not easy because some of the parts were super high, where I had like butt squeezing high, but the sound of it was so satisfying. Like when it was exhausting. It took me days and days to get it all right. But when I put it all together, I was like, whoa, that's the sound, And then to think, like Jeff Lynne not only did that on Mr. Blue Sky, but like 150 songs,
Wow.
That's a lot of time and labor in the studio to get that effect.
Well, and I think about that there are these things that are possible in the studio that if you put in the labor and the time, it will create a very magical sound that only comes from the studio like that. But sometimes we don't know what those things are until we put in all that time and labor and stumble on them and discover them, especially when we're inventing our own versions of that, too.
Yeah.
But it's just it is a really fun part about doing the studio stuff and giving ourselves enough time, because there's that part where we hit the studio and we want to work quickly, kind of like keeping the ball in the air with Jill Sobule, and we want to work fast so that we don't lose the inspiration. But then there's that part of doing stuff where we want to make sure we really, craft the doubles and, and stacks and layers so that we can find that particular sound that didn't exist. It's like, when you do stomps and you want it to sound like a stadium. I mean, it takes a lot of, you got to do a lot of stomps and stadium claps before you even get there. And then you're like, oh, that was a terrible idea for the bridge,
Yeah, right.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. All right, well, let's see here. You've been doing the walking tour of downtown Nashville, so and this is we're closing in our finishing question here. Okay. So you have told a lot of great stories about the history of downtown Nashville and some of the artists. Is there one or two of your just top favorites that everybody loves to hear on your walking tour?
Yeah, I think people always enjoy hearing stories about legendary figures like Elvis. Like in this past month, I've been telling a story about the one and only time that Elvis performed on the Grand Ole Opry, which I think is a great story because I think, first of all, the idea of Elvis at 19 years old in 1954 on the Opry is funny because nobody knew who he was yet. Ed Sullivan hadn't happened. Milton Berle hadn't happened. So he came up to Nashville. He got to play one song, and there are no films of it. There's no recordings of it. There's just written accounts. And they say Elvis walked onto the stage in a pink sports jacket. He had blonde highlights in his hair and eyeshadow. I'm thinking, what did the audience think? I mean, the Southern Opry audience in 1954 was probably pretty conservative. They hadn't seen anything that looked like that. And then he did Blue Moon of Kentucky his way, where it was almost unrecognizable from the Bill Monroe version. And, the written accounts say there was just a smattering of applause. People didn't really get it. And I always think of that scene from Back to the Future where Marty's at the school dance in the 50s and he starts playing guitar and he does Pete Townsend windmills and Eddie Van Halen tapping, stops and goes, I know you guys don't get this, but your kids are going to love it. Where that was. And I love telling that story because I think whenever you can show somebody like Elvis, who's this legendary figure that we kind of only see one way, as somebody who wasn't quite there yet, who was startling and it was not guaranteed that he was going to become successful.
Yeah.
And his first moment in Nashville. And then, the weird epilogue to that story is that as you know, Elvis made a lot of records in Nashville at RCA A and B over the years. Every time he would come to town in the 60s and 70s, without fail, the Opry would say, we would love to have you come back and do our show. But his manager, the Colonel Tom Parker, wouldn't let him do it because the Opry is democratic. You get paid musicians union fee, flat fee. And the Colonel wouldn't let Elvis do that. He said, my boy is going to get paid more. We're going to have different lighting. He's going to play 10 songs, not 2 songs. So he deprived Elvis not only of the joy that he would have had in, just being part of the Opry and hanging out with Johnny Cash and Loretta Lynn, but kind of finally making right that first appearance that didn't go that well, I mean, think of Elvis if he had been on the Ryman stage in 1970 with the jumpsuit and the karate moves. That would have been mind-blowingly great.
The jumpsuit and the karate moves. I love it, man. You just remind me that there's so much history of music that there's just a vast amount of stuff to discover going backwards.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Without even going forwards,
Even in this town, Yeah.
All right. Anything spooky on the tour?
In October, I'll usually throw in some ghost stories. I mean, there's a ghost. There's a ghost in several buildings downtown, but there's one in the Ryman in 1901. There was a reunion of Confederate soldiers from the South that came to the Ryman. And that's why for years, I think they've since renamed it, but for years, the balcony had that plaque on the front that said Confederate Gallery. That's what that was about. So during those 2 or 3 days where all those Confederate soldiers came back to Nashville for a reunion, a lot of them were in their uniforms and, reminiscing. And one of the guys died of a heart attack in the balcony at the Ryman. And his ghost, which is called the Gray Man because he's in gray Confederate uniform, has been seen many times over the years. I mean, I've talked to country singers like Bill Anderson, who told me that he saw the Gray Man. Like one night in 1970 something, he was singing in the Opry and he just glanced up for a second and said he saw a guy in a Confederate soldier uniform standing in the balcony looking at him, and then looked back and the guy was gone,
The Phantom of the Opry.
You got it.
We were just listening to that on our drive back from our soccer weekend. My daughter put it on and I listened to the Phantom of the Opera and I was like, again, a musical. I didn't quite get it first, but then I did.
Oh, some beautiful melodies in that show. Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for hanging with us. I've got a closing question that we've asked before and I will ask it to you again. This is a hypothetical one. You get to take the Wayback Studio machine, which you've already been doing because you've been already taking us back in time for some good historical stories.
I would save Lincoln. No. Okay.
Save Lincoln. Go back and save Lincoln. This time you get to go back and find young Bill and you say, listen, Bill, you guys sound great busking in the Metro in London. Wait, is it the Metro in London?
It's called the Underground. Yeah.
The Underground. Thank you.
Yeah.
You guys sound great busking in the Underground. But here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice do you want to go back and give yourself if you could? Save all the construction paper. You're going to need it.
I would, I would say, don't be afraid to be yourself. I know that sounds like elementary advice, but I spent so many years in my 20s, and maybe this is part of the learning process, trying to imitate other people. And yeah, I mean, you do learn a lot from learning songs by John Lennon or Burt Bacharach or Paul Simon, but I think you can get to a point where you're afraid that your own expression, your own style is not going to measure up or be valid. So I would go back to the young Bill and say, don't spend as much time trying to imitate. Spend more time trying to be comfortable in what you want to say and how you want to say it.
Do you think Van Gogh felt that way after copying those paintings?
Van Gogh was insecure his whole life. He didn't live very long. But even when you read his letters, it's like an autobiography. Even towards the end of his life, he was still not sure that anything that he had done was worth a damn.
Wow.
Yeah. And part of that was because he was in such awe of the masters,
Yeah.
So that runs, again, it's a theme that we return to in this show is it's a commonality in art. So I could say that to young Bill. I don't know if it would help him.
He'd probably look at you and think of you as a master, and he'd still feel insecure.
Young Bill would look at me now and he'd be like, dude, what happened to your neck?
What happened to your neck?
Which is what I think of whenever I see a photo of myself now.
I think he'd be like, cool ascot, man.
Cool ascot. I got to bring back the ascots. That's the neck protector. The neck deceiver.
That's great. So Bill, let the rock stars know where would you like them to go to find you online? What if they want to just check out your stuff, buy some great greeting cards, sign up for a walking tour? I highly recommend that, rock stars, when you come to Nashville, sign up for one of Bill's walking tours and go get the best experience downtown.
Yeah, I would say that's easy enough. That's just walkinnashville.com. That's my website. You can book tickets through there and read about the tour. Most of my musical stuff these days, all of my solo stuff is on Bandcamp. So I have a Bandcamp page where you can download the 4 or 5 EPs that I've made. Of course, all the Swan Dive records are on all the streaming services. So if you listen to them a million times, I'll get $3. And then for Oddbirds cards, I don't have a website, but you can just contact me through Instagram or Facebook. And
your books are available online too.
Yeah, all of my books, sadly, this is not uncommon for books and authors. All of the books that I've written, all 5 of the books are now out of print, but there's plenty of used copies to be had on Amazon or eBay.
Do you see the Sterling Huck letters floating around?
I do. And actually, the publishing company that did the first one was nice enough to give me the rights back, which was kind of unheard of. So I own the first Sterling Huck book. And then the second one, called Son of Sterling Huck, is a digital. You can get that on Amazon. I've thought about doing a third book, but the problem is when I started Sterling Huck, it was kind of before the internet. So people couldn't just go into Google and write Sterling Huck and go like, this guy's not real. He's just joking around. And also companies are not really set up to respond to snail mail the way they used to be in the 90s.
I got one for you. I got an idea though.
Okay.
The third one could be Sterling Huck versus Mecha Sterling Huck. And Mecha Sterling Huck would of course be the AI version, trying to get a response from all the companies.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, it's just sort of like the swan and the origami swan.
Exactly. Swan versus Mecha Swan.
We're getting a little tired of hearing about your prank letters.
Awesome, dude. Well, good to see you as always. Rockstars, thank you for listening. And Bill, I look forward to seeing you around town, man.
You too, Lidge.
Awesome, dude. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Rockstars.
All right, man. See you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Lewitt, Grace Design, Adam Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support the show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.